And a great afternoon, everyone. I'm Gary Studi, the Marketing Director with Vertical Alliance Group, and today's topic is Hours of Service. And this is brought to you today by Vertical Alliance Group. We're the makers of the Infinity Online Training System, a system that helps companies improve their CSA scores, CSA compliance, and hopefully dramatically reduce your driver training costs. But moving forward, we have a large crowd on today, and with me is Steve Kessler out of our Dallas office. But before we start, I want Steve just to go over some of the parameters for participation today. So Steve, take it away.
Thanks, Gary, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. I think we've got a lot of very important information to share with you today. Just one bit of housekeeping. As you may have heard on the introduction, all the attendees are muted, which means we can't hear you. So if you have a question anytime during the program, there's a place on the panel where you can type in your question, and those will pop up on our side here, and we'll be able to pose that question to our guest today to try to get you an answer. And if any questions that we don't get answered during the webinar, we try to keep the webinars to an hour, but we may let it run a little bit longer if we have a lot of questions today. Any questions that aren't answered, those are recorded, and we'll be able to follow up with you on those questions. The last thing I need to let you know is we are recording this session, so at the conclusion, probably tomorrow sometime, we'll be sending out an email that will have a link to the recording that you can log into and view this again if you'd like, or share it with people that were not able to attend today. So we're glad you all are here, and having said that, I'll give it back to you, Gary.
Appreciate it, Steve. Well, our very special guest today is Mr. Mike Lamb with Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration out of Austin, Texas. So since 1992, Mike's been pretty much there on the front lines trying to help where he can and give the greatest input possible to getting the carriers as safe as possible on the road. Thus, we have the major implementation here and changes for hours of service. So without further ado, here's Mike Lamb. Take it away, Mike.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to talk a little bit about the hours of service rules that have gone into place and those that are coming up here in the next few weeks. In December of 2011, we published our final rule. In there, we had what we call an effective date. The hours of service went into effect in February of last year. There's actually a compliance date, which is coming up here in July of 2013, July 1st. So just a few weeks away. I know there's a lot of hesitation, concern about how these are going to be implemented, and we're trying to do as much as we can to reach out and provide the outreach that people need for understanding these rules. And if you want to hit the next slide, we'll move on. But we want to, again, like Gary and Steve said, as you go through here, if you come up with a question when I bring something up, go ahead and type it in. I'll try and work them into the presentation as much as we can, because I think we get more out of it. A lot of times people get more out of the questions than they might out of some of these slides, but we'll go ahead and work on through these. So again, why are we changing the hours of service rules again? Well, the whole intent of these hours of service and rules has been to reduce excessively long hours that both increase the risk of fatigue-related crashes, but also affect long-term health problems for our drivers. This rule will reduce a driver's maximum allowable hours from 82 to 70 hours in a work week. That's about a 15% reduction. Now, when we say reduce their maximum hours, that's assuming that a driver under our current rules is maximizing every hour, every off-duty time, and every restart possible over that work week. In practicality, that's really not happening. There's not a lot of drivers that are doing that or able to maximize those hours just through the nature of the operation. So when we talk about we're reducing the amount of hours, what we're really doing is just reducing the maximum amount. In all honesty, I don't anticipate it having too much effect on a driver's ability to work during the week. At least that's not our economic analysis hasn't identified that big of a risk. Next slide, please. One of the things that went into effect in February 2012 was this waiting time. And what we're doing there is we're requiring or we're allowing drivers to show waiting time at the well site when they're working in the oil field, essentially on a fifth line and marked in the remarks section as waiting time at an oil well. In the past, we've allowed this to happen, but we haven't required it on the logbook. Now we're essentially adding that fifth line. There used to be some problem with some states weren't able to enforce it because our regulation, they're reading our regulation literally as saying this is what the grid has to look like. It only has 4 lines. When a driver has a fifth line, that creates a violation. So we're just trying to recognize what the industry is doing. You can hit the next slide. And give drivers an opportunity to record that time on the logbook in a way that really makes sense. So waiting time. Who's eligible for this waiting time? Only specially trained drivers operating specially constructed vehicles and for use in the oil, and this specially constructed vehicle for use in the oil field only. Now on the slide there is a picture of probably a truck that services the oil field all the time. Sand, there's sand trucks, there's water trucks. Even though that vehicle may only work in the oil field, it was only purchased by an oil field servicing company, that's all it's ever done, that's all it's ever been used for, the vehicle could be used for multiple uses. It could be bought by someone else transporting sand for whatever, water for filling up pools, whatever you want to talk about. The vehicle has to be specifically constructed for the job. There's some vehicles out there that may have gotten a pass there's some confusion in the past. And what we're trying to do with this rule is clear up that confusion and say, no, this rule is only for these special vehicles. You can do the next slide. The waiting time, again, we're going back to the waiting time. Nothing has changed there other than we're allowing that fifth line. That really is how the rule should have been interpreted all along, but we published it in the rule to hopefully clarify things. And unfortunately, when it went into effect last year, it created a lot of confusion in terms of maybe not in the enforcement industry, but in the industry, it's not in the enforcement section, but in the industry itself, where they said, well, I've been using the sand truck in that oil field all along. Well, you weren't doing it correctly. So we're trying to really clarify that. So now the other thing that became effective in February 27th, is that this oil field, the 24-hour restart. Again, this doesn't really change anything, but we wanted to make sure we clarified and really were specific about this and said any driver that wants to take that 24-hour restart, they have to be used exclusively for transportation of equipment to the oil field to a well site. They can use a 24-hour restart. Now, does this apply to the drivers operating sand? Yes. If that driver is exclusively used for the transportation of equipment or materials directly to a well site, they can use this 24-hour restart. They are not eligible to use that waiting time provision. So I think that's where some people were getting this confusion from is, well, it applied to me in one area, why doesn't it apply to me in both? And what we've done in this rule, again, is we've tried to clarify this, to say if you're operating a vehicle that's used exclusively, transporting equipment, pipe, sand, water, whatever it might be, to the well site, you're eligible for this 24-hour restart. Now, if a driver is repositioning, they're picking it up at a rail, they're picking up a bunch of pipe at a railhead, and they're driving it to your yard and storing it there just back and forth. Now, that driver is not being exclusively used at a well site, and they'll lose that option. You can hit the next slide. So again, it's only for drivers exclusively working in the field or working at in the patch at a well site.
Mike, this is Steve. A question that's come in I think kind of is related to what you're talking about here. Please qualify if your comments pertain to interstate, intrastate, and apply to interstate carrier that has allowed the construction exemption. I don't know if I...
Everything I'm talking about here applies interstate.
Interstate.
Now, intrastate, it will become effective within the next 3 years. Every state's required to adopt our regulations. We do allow some exemptions for that, but this won't be included in those exemptions. So within the next 3 years, if you're operating solely in Texas or solely in North Dakota or Montana or Pennsylvania or wherever, you're going to, eventually it will be effective intrastate. But for the time being, everything I'm talking about here has to do with interstate transportation.
Okay. One other related question real quick, Mike.
Yes.
Someone has asked, do you have a copy of the oil field log? It sounds like you're adding a fifth line. Is that available?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's a number of providers that provide logbooks.
Okay.
That you can purchase those from. They were available before we allowed the fifth line logbook in certain states, so I'm pretty sure they're out there somewhere.
They should be out there. Okay,
yes.
Great. Thanks, Mike.
Yep, no problem. Next slide.
Next slide.
So, also on February 27th, we put a kind of a tweak into the on-duty time. Now we're saying that if a driver is resting in a parked vehicle, they can claim that as off-duty time. So, resting in a parked vehicle is off-duty time. In the past, the driver, if he was stopped in a parked vehicle, they'd have to claim that as on-duty, not driving. So, we're trying to recognize make the rules more realistic to what's happening in the industry. We know a lot of drivers will get to the shipper will say, you got to be at my location by 4 p.m. The driver gets there at 3 p.m. and they say, well, we've got 3 trucks in there. We can't unload any of them until the end of the day. You're going to have to wait till the morning. The driver may spend 4 hours waiting out in the parking lot, sitting in a parked vehicle, just waiting, and instead of that time counting against them, now we're allowing them to log that as off-duty time. The other one, if a driver, this is for a co-driver situation. One driver is in the sleeper berth for 8 hours. That driver is allowed to claim up to 2 hours in the passenger seat following that sleeper berth time as off-duty time. This will allow the driver to get their full 10 consecutive hours off-duty by using 8 in the sleeper berth and 2 in the passenger seat, essentially. 2 hours is off-duty time. In the past, any time in that cab, again, was considered on-duty, not driving. So instead of telling the driver, okay, you can sit in the logbook or sit in the sleeper berth for 8 hours, but you're going to have to spend the next 2 hours sitting in the sleeper berth talking to your co-driver over his shoulder the whole time, or allowing the driver to get up in the passenger seat and claim that as off-duty time. I'm sure there's questions on this before we go to the next slide, are there?
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
Here's one that says, so you're saying that all the time waiting to load or offload now is off-duty. Does this still count against the 14-hour rule?
I didn't say that.
Okay.
What I said was park time. If a driver's waiting in line, they're not parked. So it may include time waiting to load, and possibly some time waiting to unload. If the driver is relieved of any duty, the shipper doesn't want them touching any of the product. He's sitting in the truck waiting for an hour, 2 hours to get unloaded at the dock. He can claim that time as off-duty time. If the driver is relieved of responsibility of that load, meaning he doesn't have to get out, monitor the unloading, monitor the loading, they could claim that time as off-duty time. Now, what was the second part of that question, Steve?
Well, the second part was about, does this still count against the 14-hour rule?
Yes.
Okay.
Anytime less, the only time that will not be included in that 14-hour rule is the 8-hour sleeper berth clock.
Okay. Another question here, does time in the passenger seat have to be consecutive with the sleeper time to qualify as part of the 10-hour break?
It does. If the driver, let's say the driver's in sleeper berth for 8 hours, gets out for an hour, gets back goes on duty for whatever, half an hour, on duty, not driving, doing whatever for half an hour, and then gets in the passenger seat, that would be a block. That would be a break in that 10 consecutive hours. So, yes, that would affect it.
So that would be a violation if they had done that.
Well, yeah, they wouldn't be able to use that time as their 10 hours.
Okay, I got you. Let's see if there's anything else here that's reasonably close to this. Here's a question that's sort of related to that. This was actually one that was emailed to us. The question is, we currently have electronic logs, and I know that drivers are going to have to take a 30-minute break starting 7/1. Since we haul hazmat, we have the option for our drivers to show on-duty/break with the e-logs. My concern is that while they are loading/unloading at a terminal, they are on duty, and that has been expressed multiple times to them that it is not off-duty time. However, with this new 30-minute break taking effect, there is not a way to monitor over 50-plus drivers if they are taking their break sitting in line at the terminal. I was wondering if you've been asked this question yet and how to proceed with this change. It's a long question.
That is a long question. I have not.
Been
Can you hear me
asked
still?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, I was getting an error message here for some reason. I haven't been asked that question before. There's going to be a piece. I'm going to talk about the 30-minute rest break coming up.
Okay.
In a few slides. Let's get to that, and if this person could ask that question again, or if you could email it to me later, I might be able to take it along with it.
Yeah, I can do that too. Here's another question related to your last topic here. It says, I haul gasoline and diesel fuel interstate and can wait up to 3 hours. Does the waiting time count towards the 30-minute break? They are not doing anything but waiting.
Again, if that driver is parked in the vehicle, they could claim that time as off-duty, and that off-duty time would qualify them for that 30-minute break when we get to that part as well.
Okay. Here's another question. Driver goes to warehouse to get shipment and shipment not ready yet. Is this permissible for sleeper berth or off-duty?
Again, if the driver can park it and can climb into the sleeper berth, they can claim sleeper berth. If the driver's just parked and waits for 30 minutes, an hour, they can claim that as well. It really comes down to where they're parked. Not waiting in line to load or unload, but if they're parked legally and able to just essentially turn the vehicle in.
Okay.
Shut it off.
All right, I think it might be better if we work into your next segment here.
Okay.
And then we'll take some of these other questions.
Sure. So egregious penalties, this went into effect in February as well. This is something that allows our agency to take our maximum penalty amounts when we discover a driver operating a vehicle that's been operating a vehicle for 3 hours or more beyond the driving limit. This would apply for the 11-hour driving, 14-hour on-duty time, or the 60 or 70-hour on-duty time. So we've generally in the past, we may not have gone to the maximum amount, but when drivers were well over hours, 3 or more hours in the past, generally the penalties were more severe. Now we're going up to the maximum amount. Next slide. Here's the mandatory break. This is one of the ones that becomes effective in July 1st of this year. After being driver cannot drive after 8 hours on duty without at least a 30-minute break. Is essentially the rule here. So driver gets an 8-hour time frame. This is on duty and driving time. Can have a maximum of 8 hours before they need to take a 30-minute break. This will apply to all drivers, not just truck drivers. This will apply to bus drivers as well. And I'm sure there's quite a few questions on this.
Okay. Yeah, there are.
Every other time I've talked about it, there's usually.
Okay. Let me see if I can get the best one here. Here's a question. If a driver works for 1 hour in the morning, then waits for 8 hours, then works 1 hour, how does this new rule affect his 14 hours?
If the driver's waiting for
Works
when they
1
say
hour,
yeah,
waits 8 hours, works 1 hour.
I'm assuming that 8 hours is off duty. If it is, then it would affect the 14-hour the same way. Again, this 30-minute break will not extend that 14-hour day. It's part of the 14-hour workday. The only thing that will extend the 14-hour workday is going to be the 8 hours of sleep over time.
Okay.
So
That's good. Let me see here. If a driver, that's the one I just read you. How would a driver claim his time when he is relieved from responsibility of watching, assisting in the loading or unloading of freight, but the driver is being paid for detention time?
well, our definition of on duty does not include any sort of compensation. We don't look at whether the driver is being paid or not. So a driver might not be getting paid for something, and we would consider it on duty. There are other times a driver may be getting paid for something that we might consider it off duty. So our on duty requirement does not include any sort of compensation. It's essentially, is the driver being directed by the carrier to do something, or is the driver being responsible for something related to the carrier?
Okay. Here's a question that says 2 hours off duty can be used as part of a split break, correct?
Excuse me, it's, yeah. But as long as the other part of that split break is at least 8 hours of sleep over.
Okay. Here's another question. Does this on-duty time rule also apply to intrastate, or is it interstate only?
Again, everything I'm talking about here is interstate.
Okay.
But however, within 3 years of the effective date of this rule, which would be July 1st, 2016, all the states will be required to adopt it for intrastate purposes.
Okay. All right. I think we should move on through some of the rest of this,
Okay.
and we'll take some of these questions in toward the end.
No problem.
Okay. Oops. Get the slide changed.
All right. Another provision that goes into effect on July 1st, 34-hour restart. We've made a change to the 34-hour restart. In the past, it was just 34 straight hours. Now we're saying that it's 34 hours. However, it must include 2 periods of 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. This is being done because the research that we've done, the research that's been conducted across the board, shows that the best time or the most restorative sleep a person can get is between 1 and 5 a.m., these core hours. It's when the most fatigue occurs. It's also the best time to essentially recover from that fatigue. By requiring 2 periods of 1 a.m. to 5 a.m., we provide the driver with the best opportunity to get restorative rest and reduce their fatigue. Now, again, we can't control, just like you all can't control what a driver does when they're off duty. Does this mean that they're always going to be asleep? No, of course not. But the rule is set up to provide the best opportunity for the driver to do that. Now, the other provision that goes with this 34-hour restart, it can only be used once every 168 hours. So essentially once every 7 days. And that 168-hour period starts from the beginning of the 34-hour restart. So driver goes off duty at 1 a.m. on Sunday. The driver cannot, and takes, or excuse me, on Saturday, 1 a.m. on Saturday, goes back to work, 6 a.m. on, is that right? No. 10 a.m. on Sunday morning. That driver cannot have another start of his 34-hour restart until 168 hours forward from that 1 a.m. start on Saturday. This is a tough concept for everyone to get, including myself. But when you look at it, when you look at a logbook, and essentially you're counting 7 days straight forward. So within that 34-hour restart, you can only have one of those per 7-day period. Now what happens if a driver is off 2 separate times during that 7-day period? The driver can have essentially what look like 2 34-hour restart periods during that 7-day period. However, on their logbook, they're going to need to identify which one they are using for their restart. When we do our investigation, when we're inspecting at the side of the road, usually they're going to give the driver the benefit of the doubt, give them the one that would be the most beneficial. But the driver is going to have to identify on there which one they're using for their 34-hour restart. And Steve, if you want to take questions, I'm sure there's quite a few on this.
Yeah. Here's one. Does it need to be 30 minutes consecutively, or can it be 2 15-minute breaks?
This goes back to the
that's
break.
Back to the 30-minute one. I'm sorry.
Has to be a minimum of 30 consecutive minutes.
Okay.
So the 15-minute break won't help, and during that time it's got to be a 30-minute break.
Okay. Here's a question. We are a property carrier interstate with team drivers. During the 34-hour restart, can the off-duty driver finish their 34 in the cab while the active driver begins driving?
As long as that driver is coming out of the sleeper berth and has a minimum of 8 hours off, 8 hours in the sleeper berth, they could claim that final 2 hours as off-duty time.
And be in the cab.
Correct.
Okay.
Be in the passenger seat.
Okay, here's another question. It looks like this one is related to the 34-hour. I'm going to see if I can find, or that was the one related to the 30-minute. Here's a question. Will the 34-hour restart with the 2 periods of 1A to 5A include construction? Their restart is 24 hours.
No, the construction will be still at the 24-hour restart. This will only apply to companies taking the taking the 34-hour restart.
Okay. Here's a little bit of a different question, Mike. Someone wants to know what practical research was done, meaning in the field, not in sleep studies or research facilities.
The Virginia Tech Transportation Center, I believe it's called, actually did in-vehicle studies of fatigue. They used a variety of things. They have these systems that actually track how often a driver's eyes blink, whether their head nods, lane tracking, everything that tracks the driver's driver's fatigue. And that was done in vehicle. That was also, I believe, the ATA's, the American Trucking Research Institute, did part of that as well, or that was a joint study with them. So there, in addition to the vast amounts of sleep studies that are being done, there is actual in-vehicle fatigue monitoring being done as well.
Okay. Question, does a team have to take the 34-hour restart away from the truck?
No, I guess they could, technically the 34-hour restart could be a combination of off-duty and sleeper berth. If a team was stopped at a truck stop or somewhere where they could park the vehicle for 2 days, and they were off-duty that entire time, but they were sleeping in the truck, they could either claim it all as off-duty, or they could claim it off-duty with the combination of the sleeper berth.
Okay. Here's another question. What about the drivers that work a third shift delivery schedule? I'm not sure what that means.
Well, what that means is they're going to have at least 2 days off if they want to use this 34-hour restart. They're not going to be able to work a third shift 7 days a week and get the 34-hour restart. No one's requiring them to get the restart. The restart is not like the mandatory break. You don't have to use the restart. But if you want to take advantage of the restart and be able to reset your hours, it is going to have to include those 2 periods from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m.
Okay. Here's another question. If a driver starts working after his reset, but after 2 days of work, the truck breaks down for 2 days, and this include 2 consecutive nights with 2 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. periods. Can the driver use this as his restart?
Yes, the driver, there are going to be times, not just when a vehicle breaks down, but there are going to be times where a driver is not driving for, this 34-hour restart. We recognize that, but this driver is still only going to be allowed to take 1 restart every 7 days. So on his logbook, the driver would have to identify which 34-hour break was the restart.
Okay, the next question relative to the 34-hour is a driver required to take a 34-hour restart, or is it something he can use if desired?
No, it's not a requirement. It can be used if a operation is only operating 8 hours a day. They wouldn't necessarily ever need one. They could work 7 days a week and never get close to that 70-hour time limit. It's only for companies that want to take it. It's not a requirement.
Okay. This next question sort of relates to that. Regarding the 30-minute break, isn't this designed for over-the-road drivers who are driving 11 hours straight? If the driver is doing LTL with multiple stops and he's at one stop for 30 minutes, does that count as a break?
It would only count as a break if the driver was off duty or able to take time in the sleeper berth. The break is designed as a fatigue reducing activity, or break in the logbook, break in the day, to essentially recharge the driver even just for a short time. So it wasn't just decided only on long haul operations.
Okay. Next question is, does the mandatory rest break have to be logged as off duty to count?
No, it could be a sleeper berth as well.
Okay. Let's see. Here's a question. Instead of a team driver taking a 30-minute break, could they continually rotate 8-hour shifts and stay in compliance?
I've done that one before, and I think at some point they run into trouble with the 70-hour rule. But yes, they could alternate 8 hours, and no, there would be a problem. I think the second or third day they'd be over hours in terms of driving time. But yeah, they technically team drivers could rotate their time back and forth. It's not a mandatory, 30 minutes.
Okay. Next question is, please restate when the 168 hours in a week begins. Is it at 1 a.m. on the first day off or 5 a.m. on the first day back to work?
It's at whatever time the first 34-hour restart starts. So the driver may stop at 5 p.m. on a Friday and not come back to work until 5 a.m. on Sunday. Well, the restart would begin essentially whenever that 34-hour restart began. It's not 1 a.m. It's just whenever the first 34-hour restart began.
Here's another question. Even if a driver starts his 168-hour work week, works 1 day, and then takes 4 days of vacation, does he still have to wait until 168 hours have passed from this initial start to qualify for the 34-hour restart?
No, the driver could take that second period where the driver was off duty for 4 days, but they would just have to identify in their logbook that that second period was the restart they were using, not the first one.
Okay. Here's another one. If the 34-hour restart isn't mandatory, what are the regulations behind not using it?
The same ones that have been. 70 hours in a 6-day, 60 hours in a 7-day period, 70 hours in an 8-day period. You can't drive after being on duty for 70 hours in an 8-day period, and you can't drive after being on duty for 60 hours in a 7-day period. Those rules have not changed.
Okay, if the driver does not get a 34-hour restart, then he would go back to the old way of dropping hours at midnight. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. We got a lot of questions here. Do you want to move on and take some of these at the end, or?
I'm fine taking them now.
Okay.
It doesn't bother me.
Steve,
Okay.
I think we need to move on only because some of the
Actually,
clients need
let's get through all the slides, and then
presentation. Right.
yeah, we'll make sure we get through all the slides, and then we'll
Okay.
catch what we can at the end.
Okay, let's do that. I'll go to the next slide.
So electronic logging devices. You know, I mentioned the maximum that the logbooks or the hours of service regulations were going to reduce the maximum hours a driver can drive. Well, in order to really identify how many hours a driver is driving, electronic logging devices are probably going to be necessary. You can go to the next slide. Moving ahead for progress in the 21st Century Act, you know, is the latest law that that authorized our agency. Go ahead to the next slide, Steve. And what it does is and there are a number of requirements for the agency. In this one, in this law, we're required to publish a rulemaking on electronic logging devices. Now, we did this once, or twice, or 3 times, depending on who you talk to. But the most recent time we did it, we published them and said we were going to require these electronic logbooks for certain segments of the industry. Well, we got sued. Our agency was sued, and we ended up losing that case. Well, the Congress came in and said, all right, you lost the case, but you need to move forward and get this law written. So what we're going to be doing, we're actually preparing what we call a supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking. And the initials there, SNPRM. What that will do is it says, okay, our agency published a rule. You can go to the next slide. Our agency published a rulemaking. The rulemaking didn't go through. Now we're publishing a supplement to that notice. And this supplement usually doesn't specify what the rule is going to be. We're going to talk about our supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking is going to propose minimum performance standards for electronic logging devices, as well as the requirements for the mandatory use of, you can go to the next slide, mandatory use of devices to prepare these logbooks. It's also going to talk about the requirements for supporting hours, for hours of service supporting documents, and it'll identify prohibitions on the carrier as well as the enforcement community to prevent harassment of the drivers. One of the big issues we've heard in moving forward with electronic logging devices is a lot of drivers are concerned about harassment or perceived harassment that they're getting from their companies, or in some cases at the roadside by officers. So the supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking, you can go to the next slide. We'll talk about, go back to that last one real quick. It's essentially, it says, okay, we're going to publish this rule. Here are some of the general areas we want to identify, and what we want is for the industry, the enforcement community, the general public to provide comments and to kind of give us an idea of some things that are being real-life practices, but also things that need to be addressed in this rule. Next slide. So that's it for what I have. I know there's going to be a lot of questions here. I'll answer as many as I can. We got about 20 minutes left on this, I guess.
Yeah.
But so Steve, fire away.
All right. Let me go back up here and take some of these from the top. Some people have been waiting patiently to get their questions answered. Yeah, go ahead.
Steve, let me just interject real quick with Mike and to the audience. Please feel free to still send us, when we put out the contact page, just send all the questions again to us. We'll direct them to Mike or answer them ourselves. So don't feel that since we can't get to all the questions possibly, just go ahead and put them in an email and we'll make sure we get an answer for you.
The other thing I'd like to point out is if you go to our website, www.fmcsa.dot.gov, we have a number of frequently asked questions, and in fact some of the questions that have been asked today are actually covered almost directly in our frequently asked questions. We also have logbook examples to show what the logbooks should look like, or examples of what a good minimum break would look like, and those sort of things. So make sure you familiarize yourself with what's on there. If I can't answer your questions or don't get time to get to them.
Okay, Mike, here's a question. Is it true that a driver does not have to take a 34-hour reset? They can keep going as long as they are picking up hours each night. My drivers are telling me that they are hearing that they will now be required to take the 34-hour restart every 7 days or 168 hours.
There is no requirement to take a 34-hour restart. The 34-hour restart was provided to recognize companies that maybe weren't operating 7 days a week. They're getting their drivers home on a Friday night or a Saturday morning, and the drivers may not be coming back until Sunday afternoon or Monday morning. So this 34-hour restart is not mandatory.
Okay, here's a question. Can teams split off-duty and sleeper time?
Yes. Off-duty and sleeper berth can be split and combined, provided you have a minimum of 8 hours in the sleeper berth. And I need to correct something I said earlier. I think on one of the first slides, or related to the minimum break, I mentioned the question was if you were in the sleeper berth for 8 hours, you got out, took a break, or got out, did something on duty, and then took you 2 hours in the
seat, in the
passenger seat, I said that you could not count that for your consecutive, which was correct. Now, if that driver was, as long as you had that 8 hours in the sleeper berth, they could combine a 2-hour off-duty time for that split sleeper berth. But being in the passenger seat is only allowed to be marked as off-duty directly following a sleeper berth. So I can't remember if I answered that one correctly or not. I just want to make sure I clarified that.
So, Mike, is the split berth rule still in effect?
Yes, there's no change to the split sleeper berth.
Okay.
On the current rule.
Can you expand a little on the off-duty time counting against the 14-hour rule?
Sure. When a driver comes, the 14-hour rule says driver cannot work after having been on duty for 14 consecutive hours. So driver comes on duty at 6 a.m. By 8 p.m. that night, the driver cannot drive after 8 p.m. Now what happens in the middle of the day, it essentially starts counting from 6 a.m. Once that driver goes on duty, their on-duty clock, that 14-hour clock, starts counting. The only time it won't count, or it'll be extended, is if the driver has a minimum of 8 hours in the sleeper berth. Any other time is going to take away from that 14-hour clock, or will be included in that 14-hour clock. If the driver has 8 hours in the sleeper berth, 8 consecutive hours in the sleeper berth during that 14-hour period, it's extended by that time. Essentially, the 8 hours in the sleeper berth doesn't count. So let's say the driver went on duty at 6 a.m., worked until noon, took an hour break, so that's 6 hours on duty and driving, takes an hour break. Now he's at 7 hours from the time that he started. The driver goes on duty not driving until let's say 5 o'clock. So now we're at 11 hours from the time that driver went on duty. So driver goes back, drives another 3 hours. Now he's at the 14-hour limit. Cannot drive after that 14th hour. That 1 hour break in the middle, while that met the requirement for the mandatory 8-hour mandatory break, it does not help the driver on the 14-hour day.
Okay. Next question. If a driver works for 1 hour in the morning, then waits for 8 hours, then works 1 hour, how does this new rule affect his 14 hours?
Okay, so the driver comes on at 8, works 8 hours?
A driver works for 1 hour in the morning, then waits 8 hours, then works 1 hour.
Right.
How does this new rule affect his 14 hours?
Same way the old rule did. The that part has not changed. The 14-hour clock starts at that as soon as the driver goes on duty. So the driver goes on duty for an hour, goes, I assume, off duty for 8 consecutive hours, comes back on duty for another hour. That's 10 hours from the time that driver went on duty.
Okay. Next question regarding the 30-minute mandatory break. Our drivers carry hazmat. How do we comply with DHS and FBI hazmat security measures? Is it safe to have drivers released of all responsibility for a fully loaded tanker truck for a 30-minute period? How do we maintain security?
The mandatory break requirement does recognize the 397.5 hazardous material attendance rule. And the driver, if all they're doing is making sure that if they meet the attendance requirements, they can log that time as off duty to meet that break.
Okay.
So, and again, this is covered on the website and almost that exact question.
Okay. Next question, is there an oil field exemption for the required 30-minute breaks every 8 hours?
There is not an oil field exemption. The only difference is a driver working at the oil field, well, a specially trained driver operating specially constructed equipment at the oil field could take that time at the well site as off-duty. They'd have more options for the off-duty time than a property driver.
All right. Next question here says, what if you're an LTL driver and you have stops to get off and customers are going to close by a certain time? If you stop and take that break for 30 minutes, you will have a returned shipment. Many drivers in LTL do not take lunches until all stops are off and pickups made.
Yeah, we recognize that there's going to probably be some changes for LTL or some of the local delivery companies as well. But there's really nothing in there in the rule right now to provide any sort of relief for those drivers.
Okay. I think you may have touched on this question. Does this break apply to passenger carrying vehicles?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Next question, is a driver may be driving 1 hour and loading at a residence 8 hours. When will he have to show off duty break because all work is either driving and on duty not working? Whoa.
Well, run that one by me again.
Okay, it says, question is, a driver may be driving 1 hour and loading at a residence 8 hours. I'm assuming this sounds like a moving company. When will he have to show off-duty break because all work is either driving and on duty not working?
Well, the driver at some point is going to have a 30-minute break during the day. It can't go longer than eight hours without the 30-minute break. And in fact, if the driver's, there could be issues in terms of the 14-hour rule in there as well.
Okay. Here's an interesting one. If a driver clocks in and out, to meet the 30-minute requirement, does the driver need to actually clock out?
No. For 100 air mile radius drivers that are just using a time card, this requirement, this 30-minute break, is not in the regulations where it shows that it has to be. It's not in the regulations for the driver under 100 air mile radius. 100 air mile radius just gets out of keeping a logbook. Their time card is still going to have to show everything it showed before: time on, time off, and the total number of hours worked that day. Now, the total number of hours worked that day are going to need to be at least 30 minutes less than the total. Like, let's say they clock in at 8 a.m., they clock out at 8 p.m. There's going to, instead of 12 hours on duty, it's going to have to at least show 11 and a half hours on duty. At the most, show 11 and a half hours on duty.
Okay. I think that answered a couple of questions here. Here's another question. Does the 30-minute break and 8-hour rule apply to drivers within 150 air mile radius and operating under the construction exemption rule, which allows 12 hours driving and 15 hours combined within 24?
I'm not familiar with that construction exemption. Again, the 30-minute break is going to apply to any carrier, regardless of the industry they're working in.
Okay. Let's see. Somebody wants to know if they can get a copy of the slides. I'm assuming that's okay with you, Mike.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. We've answered that one. I've got some of these. I'm trying to make sure I'm not repeating the same thing again. I think we've answered this. Does a team have to take the 34-hour restart away from the truck? I think you answered that one already.
No, they don't. They could use the combination sleeper.
Right. I think we did have that one. Here's one. I heard that this can only be done at their home terminal. Is that correct? Does home terminal have anything to do with this, Mike?
The 30-minute break?
I'm assuming that's. I'm not sure. It doesn't say exactly.
Either, I guess it doesn't matter because it doesn't matter. It's not either one. The 34-hour restart can be done in a truck stop anywhere you want.
Anywhere.
Same with the 30-minute break can be done.
Okay, good. Let's see. If a driver starts working after his reset, wait, we already answered that one. I'm sorry.
Mike, there's still one here still confused about the 34-hour restart. Am I hearing you right that it is not mandatory?
It is not mandatory. If a driver can operate within 70 hours over an 8-day period or 60 hours over a 7-day period, then they do not need to, there's no requirement to take the 34-hour restart.
Okay.
Hang on, I've got to get to the bottom. There's literally dozens of questions here.
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
Okay, here's the question. Can you still use the 8-day, 70-hour clock old school instead of using the 34-hour restart?
Yes.
Yes. Good. If, as you have identified, the driver uses the second 34-hour period as his restart, are they not able to use the 34-hour restart more than once a week?
They are not. Again, it can only be used once within 168 hours, which is 7 days. So once a week, if they have 2 restarts in the 7-day period, they just need to identify in the logbook which one they're using for the restart.
Okay. Here's a question actually for us. Will this webinar be added to the Infinity training videos or accessible to forward to drivers? And the answer is yeah, the webinar is being recorded and we'll make that available. So anybody that you would like to see it, whether it's company personnel or drivers, will be able to log in and see it. Sure, that's not a problem.
I see another one here regarding egregious violations. If a driver failed to take the required 10 off duty, let's say he was off duty for 9.5 hours, and then returns to work, the driving time from the previous day and current day will be combined and therefore exceed the 11 hours driving time. If the combination of the time is in excess of 3 hours beyond the 11 hours, would this be an egregious violation?
Yes, that could be subject to that would be considered an egregious violation and considered for a maximum penalty. Usually, the ones we would limit it to, or the violations we would limit it to, would be ones where a driver has driven for 13 or more straight hours, or been on duty for 17 or more straight hours. In cases where a driver may have made a mistake on their logbook or could possibly have made a mistake, they changed time zones or something and got screwed up that way. While it could be considered an egregious violation, I think we would generally use a little discretion and stick to ones that were really egregious, not something where it may have been just an error of reporting. But technically, yes, that could be considered an egregious violation.
Okay.
Mike, here's a question. When do you believe a proposed rule concerning ELDs will be published by the agency?
I was told that it will be published before the end of the calendar year.
By the end of the calendar year. Okay.
At least that's the schedule right now. It's subject to change, but that was the latest guesstimate I was given.
Okay. Mike, a couple of people are asking if you could repeat that web address where they could go to get information.
Yeah, hold on. It's www. Oops. It is www. Oops, hold on. www.fmcsa Frank Mary Charlie Sam Alpha .dot.gov. That's the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration website. And when you go there, we have a link for rules and regulations. And if you go on the hours of service rules, there's a number of question and answers as well as some law book examples.
Okay. And then since they may be just calling in and just listening, Mike's address is mike.lamb, L-A-M-M, @dot.gov is Mike's web address. And I'll just say your phone number, 512 area code 916-5440, extension 226. He's out of Austin, Texas, Central Time.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Yeah, there's one last one. I think obviously the 34-hour thing causes some confusion. The question is, I'm still confused about the 34-hour restart. Am I hearing you right that it is not mandatory? So taking off from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. is just an option.
The use of the 34-hour restart is not a requirement. However, if you're going to use the 34-hour restart, it needs to include a period of two periods from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. On 2 consecutive nights. So using it is not required. But if you do want to take advantage of the 34-hour restart, what is required is that you have 2 periods of 34 hours, of the 1 a.m. to 5 a.m.
Okay. Here's a question. Where would Mike recommend we go for guidance on intrastate regulations for Texas?
You should contact the Texas DPS.
Texas DPS.
Yeah, and they have a commercial vehicle enforcement unit, the CVE unit. If you go on the Texas DPS website, which I don't know off the top of my head, and I'm not on my normal computer, but if you just search Texas Department of Public Safety, in the search engine you can just type in CVE and it will pull up the commercial vehicle enforcement page, and they'll have contact numbers in there.
Okay, great. We're right at 4 o'clock. There's just one other comment that I'd like to make, Gary, before we have you wrap it up. One of the questions is when will Vertical Alliance / Infinity have the new hours of service training available for us to give to the drivers? Let me say this. We have already completed a video that explains just the changes that are set to go into effect or have, and the main ones going effect in July 1st. We are currently in the process of redoing our regular hours of service training to include these new regulations. And I don't know for sure what the time frame for that would be. I'm going to guess by maybe mid-June. Gary, would that be a fair statement?
We're still hoping the first week of June.
First week of June.
So one way or another, if you contact us, we'll definitely put your name on the list, and you'll be first contacted.
But we do. I do want to remind everyone we have already in the system a video that just explains the changes that Mike discussed with us today, and so you can review those with your drivers.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I think we've come to our 4 o'clock cutoff here. I appreciate everybody that's on. There are still questions that haven't been answered. Like I said, we've got a list of those, and we'll try to make sure that we get some response back to you on the questions that You didn't get
Steve,
answered.
do you want to go back to the opening slide, and it has our contact info?
Sure thing.
And in case anyone wants, again, everything's recorded, so we just call us or email us, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible, and be glad to help you in any way we can.
Let me go to the end slide and show you our web addresses one more time and emails. Whoop, I'd done it. I messed up. There we go. So just contact us at those phone numbers or any of those email addresses, and we'll do the best we can to get your answers.
Absolutely. And Mike, we can't thank you enough, and to all our guests, we really thank your attendance, and we'll be back next month with another great subject too. So thanks again.
Thanks, Mike.
No problem.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.